Hello, in this video I am going to be looking at the Churchill Mk.VI. This is a tank that doesn't get very much attention or interest from the community from what I can tell. However, it is a sleeper OP tank. It is actually very, very good. And of course I'll be getting into why that is soon, but let's first talk about how you can actually get this. It is currently available in this Armoured Cavalry event on Stage 9, where basically all you have to do is win battles in tanks from tiers 4 to 10 and get mastery badges, and then you can unlock the tank at Stage 9. So the Churchill Mk.VI, it is actually very similar to the Churchill Mk.VII in terms of its overall feel and gameplay. However, it does have some standout traits which do make it quite a bit better. And let me just get right into that. So I'm going to very quickly look at the model of this tank on Game Models 3D, just because I think Game Models 3D does a very nice job of sort of combining the tank's model with its armor profile. Blitz kit also does a similar thing, however not for the base armor, and I find that the highlights that Game Models 3D has are very useful. So here is the Churchill Mk.VI. You can see that this front area, the front right plate, let's call it for now, is 176mm thick. The area in the middle of the front right plate is 152. The left front plate is 152. The lower plate is 139. The turret front is 176 with another 152mm gun mantlet. So those are all a bunch of numbers. Wow, great. What's that all mean? Consider the penetration level of tier 6 heavy tanks and medium tanks. Most of them are sitting around 145 to 155mm thick, which means that this 152mm base is very strong. The 139, which is angled as well on the lower plate, is also very strong. It means that the armor profile of this tank, when facing same tier enemies, looks something like this here. And this is a lot of the time what you'll be seeing in a Churchill VI as an enemy. This is 147mm of penetration, which is a fairly decent penetration level at tier 6. It's nothing amazing, but it's not terrible either. And you can see that the armor profile of the tank is basically completely red. The only area which you can go through is the turret roof, which is an overmatch. The turret front, too strong. The upper plate's too strong. The mid-angled plate, too strong. The lower plate is too strong. It doesn't even have exploitable track weak points like other Churchill tanks. And of course I'll get into that in a moment. But let's see here. You can't penetrate it anywhere when it is facing you. How about when the hull is turned? There is an exploit you can use to deal with the Churchill Mk.VI when it does turn the hull. And in this case, note it is over angled, so if enemies have high enough penetration, they can go through just because you are past that 70-degree angle. But the exploit you can use against the Churchill Mk.VI when the hull is turned is to shoot where, well, right above the tracks essentially. See this 50.6mm armor plate? It is much weaker than the rest of the side armor. At this angle, it is only 92mm thick. Compare this to the rest of the sides at 140 to 170, it is much weaker. And of course, this is an exploit because you can't see it in game. The tracks and sort of the visual elements of this tank are hiding that weak point. So do try and make use of that if you do see Churchill VIs trying to angle their hull against you. Of course, switching to premium ammo changes the armor profile completely, and that's just the thing with flat armor. It's either very good or it's not going to be very good. There's no in between. So you can see lower plate is now weak. The upper plates are both weak, even though one side is slightly stronger than the other. Doesn't matter against 210mm of APCR. The turret front is still decent. You can see that because the turret edges are slightly angled, it does make the turret front still fairly hard to deal with, and don't be fooled by that gun mantlet highlight. The mantlet is still far too strong for this level of penetration to go through. Also note, when you do angle the hull, depending on which way you angle, the upper plate is going to be stronger on one side and weaker on the other. So in this case, you can see in this right image, the 176mm plate is showing to the enemy. If I were to turn the tank the other way, for example like this, then it would be the 152mm plate showing. This is actually a very important part of angling the tank, because that 20 something millimeters of armor difference does actually do a lot. You can see here the tank's angled 259mm thick. Here at a similar angle, 200mm thick. So it does make a difference which way you're sort of turning the front of this tank. So let me very quickly talk about how you're going to have to deal with this tank as an enemy, because they're going to be running rampant on the battlefield soon. The armor behind the tracks. A lot of Churchills have a weakness behind the tracks, which you can see. Well, it's not the case with the Mk.VI, but let's look at the Mk.VII. You can see here the tracks are hiding a weakness behind them, which is only 120mm thick on the Churchill Mk.VII. Don't be fooled into shooting the tracks on the Mk.VI, because it doesn't have the same weakness. The weakest part of this armor is 180, which is still very hard to go through for most tanks you face. And of course the strongest parts are almost 300mm thick. Of course, that's not even accounting for the fact that this tank a lot of the time is going to be angling, and you just can't deal with such thick armor. So don't be baited into shooting the tracks. Next, the turret roof. As mentioned before, it is only 25mm thick, meaning a lot of guns that you face are going to be overmatching you. So do sort of try and exploit this if you are an enemy which has a gun larger than 77mm thick, and you can go through that. Next, side scraping. I've already mentioned the side scraping weak point, which is only 50mm thick. The rear spaced armor plate is another thing you do have to watch out for if you are a smasher or some tank with very big HE. So here you can see highlighted in purple that there is a spaced armor plate of 25 on the rear, which you want to try and avoid if you are trying to HE this tank. And then finally, don't shoot these red areas on the tank. They are not a fake highlight because they are spaced armor, they are actually just extremely thick and you're not going to be able to damage the tank. So don't get baited by this tank's red armor, which is spaced. It is actually going to bounce your shot. So next, let's look at the gun of the Churchill VI. It has a 75mm gun. Its damage is 160 on AP, 135 on APCR, and 200 on HE. Its reload is 4.6 with 2100 DPM, which is actually a very good DPM for tier 6, even though its alpha damage is on the lower end. Penetration is decent, 145 on AP, 202 on APCR, and 38 on HE. The 38 is actually very nice. A lot of tier 6 tanks have 20mm of HE penetration, so this 38 does allow you to go through tanks like the Nashorn, the Hellcat, and other very lightly armoured tanks like those. Aim time, 3 seconds or 3.2 with refined gun, which is very good. Base aim time is decent at 2.3, dispersion is very good at 0.326, and gun handling is great for a heavy tank at 0.18, 0.18.1. And remember, this tank isn't moving very fast, so you're not really going to be feeling the gun handling all that much. And then gun depression 6 degrees, which is actually pretty good. It may not sound like it, but other Churchills have 4 or 5 degrees, so having 6 is actually pretty nice. Overall, this gun, it is great. It has very good DPM. Even though its alpha damage is low, it makes up for it with very fast reload. It's got good aim time, accuracy, and gun handling, so it's just very consistent and reliable. Really, the only thing you will find with this gun that might cause you an issue is the alpha damage, which does mean that you get out-traded by enemy tanks if they do have higher damage, and you can't manage to put in 2 shots every time they shoot you. But next, moving to mobility, the top speed of this tank is 20, which is very slow. Reverse is 12, which is actually pretty decent considering you only go 8 kilometers faster forwards, but 20 kilometers per hour is a very slow top speed for any tank really, and it does cause this tank some issues, especially in fast-paced games. It means you can't keep up with sort of your team, which is going forward and dealing the damage. You'll be lagging behind. Traverse speed 30.6 and 25.6 on medium terrain. These are both perfectly fine for this tank. In fact, it feels fairly mobile with such traverse speeds. Its in-game acceleration is 12, which is decent. Again, consider this tank has very good armor for a tier 6 heavy tank. That's not bad at all. And the tank weighs 40 tons. The actual acceleration rate is slightly less, just because its ground resistances are, well, fairly normal for a heavy tank. 11 horsepower per ton on hard terrain and 9.3 on medium terrain. Again, it's slow, but you only go 20 kilometers per hour. You don't need a very high power to weight ratio. And for the tank that this is, for how much armor it has, the tank does feel actually fairly mobile. It's not fast, but it is mobile. So next, I'll get into the equipment and then I'll compare it to the Churchill Mk.VII, as again, that's a tech tree tank which is fairly similar. It's a fairly important comparison. For the consumables, I'd use this, just as the tank doesn't need a speed boost because its top speed is only 20 and you are a heavy tank. Having the repairs are useful. Provisions, just the normal setup. Again, this tank only goes 20. There's no point using extra fuel, just because this tank is already that slow. If you did feel like the tank has fairly weak modules, you can use the protective kit to try and increase that protection on your modules. So, equipment. Gun rammer, definitely, because this tank doesn't have heat, and also because it is mainly DPM focused. It absolutely does not struggle penetrating enemy tanks, even tier 7s. Defense system, just because improved modules is useless. Improved control, because this tank, again, it only goes 20. It doesn't at all struggle to reach 20 kilometers per hour. So I've gone with improving the traverse speed to help me be a bit more mobile and angle the hull. Enhanced armor. Again, this tank has very strong armor. It is very flat, so enhanced armor does make quite a big difference on the armor plates of this tank. It's basically mandatory to have on this tank. And very quickly, I'll show you what kind of an effect enhanced armor has on the Churchill Mk.VI. So here is the tank. Well, let me take off calibrated shells. Here is the tank against 145mm penetration. You can see the lower plate is almost penetrable. However, use enhanced armor, it goes completely red. And let's see, with 157mm of penetration, if you use enhanced armor, it does make the upper plate slightly stronger, but then remember, you can angle the tank, so the difference with angling does take it from being almost penetrable to red. So enhanced armor is definitely worth using on this tank. And of course, if you do use if you do use premium ammo and you're going through the turret, enhanced armor also makes a fair bit of difference on the turret front. So it is definitely worth using enhanced armor on this tank. Next, the gun laying drive, just because it is useful, and this tank, while its show velocities aren't amazing, it's not terrible to the point where you have to use supercharger. Also, a lot of the time you're in close range, so you just don't need such high velocity. And next, vertical stabilizer or refined gun. Both are great choices just because the tank's fairly slow, so refined gun would work very well for snapping shots just because the gun doesn't bloom out that much. On the other hand, vertical stabilizer would make it so that your gun barely blooms at all just because of how slow you're moving. Either are a pretty good choice on this vehicle. So let me very quickly look at the differences between the Mk.VI and the tech tree Mk.VII. Very simply, what you need to know is that the Churchill Mk.VI has better gun handling and aim time. Its gun handling and dispersion. Its penetration is almost the same, but it has better HE shells. The engine power is also better on the Mk.VI, giving it better overall mobility and acceleration. And the biggest difference of everything on these two tanks is the armor profile. The Mk.VI has 176mm on the turret front, the Mk.VII has 152 on the turret front. The Mk.VI has 176 at the strongest on the hull front and 152 at the weakest. The Churchill Mk.VII has 152 at the strongest on the most areas, on the most parts of the front of the hull, and 139 at its weakest. Essentially, the Mk.VI just has a more reliable frontal hull armor profile. Also, it is missing the track weakness that the Churchill Mk.VII has, as it is much stronger on the Churchill VI than it is on the Churchill VII. But that is it for the differences. Essentially, the Mk.VI has got much better frontal hull armor and also fewer weak points. Very quickly showcase this tank's armor reliability in this battle on Himmelsdorf. I'm not going to sort of show the entire thing just because it's not really one which needs showing the entire thing, but just to see the armor profile of the Churchill VI. So, already one shot bounced from a stock T-29. Yes, his penetration isn't as high as, well, other tier 7 heavy tanks, but it's still not terrible, and it's still higher than a tier 6. Unfortunately, of course, against HE from a KV2, you're not going to be bouncing anything. But to bounce a tier 7 already at this point is pretty decent. Another shot bounced from the Skoda T25 and another one from the T29. You can see this tank's armor profile is holding up. Here the T29 switches to premium ammo and he bounces once again. So at this point I've already bounced, I believe, 4 shots from higher tier heavy tanks, even ones using premium ammo. So you'll notice sort of how I'm angling. It might be a bit odd, but of course with the Churchills that have the hull with the tracks going in front of the upper and lower plate, it does mean you can angle around the corner a bit like this, as the tracks do hide your frontal armor, at least to some extent. But again, you can see I bounced one more shot of premium ammo from the T29. So now I'm just going to have to fall back a bit because my team on this side is falling. But here you'll be able to see the Basotto comes around the corner, I put a shot into him, and he bounces off the tracks. The Skoda does penetrate me right through, I believe, the frontal upper plate, which is a nice shot by him. However, it will be one of the few. Here he bounces another AP shot off this tank. And at this point in the battle you can see how much damage I've blocked already. It is already higher than my whole tank's hit point pool, which for a tier 6 heavy tank blocking exclusively tier 7 heavy tanks, it's a very impressive amount of damage. I take another shot from the T29, bouncing it off the tracks. And then, unfortunately, I do go down to the Skoda T45. But here, very quickly, I'll show you the shots that I received on this tank. Of course, that big one is from the KV2 splashing HE. But you'll see one penetration into the front upper plate, one bounce off that 176mm plate. These shots are, I believe one of them is a penetration, the other two are bounces, and they just show up like that because they are going through the gun mantlet. Then of course one clipping through you can see is a third bounce, one on the side of the turret there, one on the turret roof or turret top there, another on the edge of the turret there, and then one on the side of the turret. Of course there's the ones which you can't see which went off the top, well, the front of the tracks. So For a tier 6 heavy tank to bounce so much damage, so many shots from tier 7s, which they even used premium ammo, it's very impressive armor. 1775 blocked. So next I'm just going to show a good battle I had in this tank, which sort of shows this tank's gameplay and some of its drawbacks fairly well. So you'll see this is Ghost Factory. It is a tier 6 battle, so of course I'm not expecting these players to be the most professional veteran players, and there are three enemy heavy tanks, so I'm expecting they might go towards base C. I was contemplating whether to go to B or not, just because I am a slow heavy tank. You do have to make the decision for where you're going to go in the battle right at the beginning and kind of stick with it. But I did decide to go towards base A, thinking that if enemies do get spotted or go to C, I can kind of cut across the middle, which is what I'm going to do right now. So you can see this tank's mobility. Going uphill, it's not the worst. For a tank that only goes 20 km per hour, I'm going up the hill at around 16, 17, which isn't terrible. The main issue of this tank is definitely the fact you're limited at 20. You can't go any faster than it, which is a bit unfortunate. It does make you very slow at getting into positions, and of course relocating is very awkward. But a necessary downside considering how good the armor of this tank is, and the DPM as well, as you'll see against this Tiger 131. So the Tiger, it has around 150mm penetration, meaning he will struggle to go through my tank. And you can see he's already bounced off his first shot. And now you can see how I'm angling the tank, sort of turning it to the side, turning it back and forth, and just trying to abuse the angles which you can get on this tank. The Tiger does load premium ammo there, doing 166, but for me doing 1038 damage to him and only taking 166 in return while bouncing his other shots, that's a good trade. So here you'll see, again, the top speed is just limiting. The KV-1S shooting off in front as I'm stuck at 20 km per hour. And one of the annoying things on this tank is you don't know whether you should try drive in front of the faster enemies to cut them off, or whether they're going to stop and let you sort of chase behind them. So here I'm just going to go forward towards this rock in front of A, hoping I can maybe get under the bridge towards the Hellcat. But an AC-4 Sentinel is spotted. And this Sentinel, the first thing he does is load APCR, which is what you should do when facing this tank. And it will be the reason that he manages to go through my tank quite a few times. But you can still see my DPM is very good, and I'm managing to take quite a lot of hit points off this Sentinel. I'm now down to 600 hit points thanks to that Sentinel shooting me quite a few times. However, with this tank's high base HP of 1200, it does mean that you can absorb quite a bit of damage. And again, if making enemies use premium ammo, well, this tank makes enemies use premium ammo, which, while they are still penetrating your armor with that premium ammo, it is still reduced damage, which does help you to last longer in battle. And you can see this game is going to end with me doing 2200 damage. But that game and the previous game do show off this tank's strengths fairly well. The high DPM of the vehicle, being able to completely cut through enemies very fast, the strong armor being able to bounce enemy heavy tanks when you are, well, hiding the weaker parts of the front, especially as enemy tier 7s do have higher penetration, but it does show the tank's strengths quite well. 86,000 damage, credits in that battle for 2,200 damage. But yeah, the Churchill Mk.VI. It is definitely a tank worth getting from this event, as this is an easy event. Just win a few battles, get some mastery badges, and you'll have this tank. I might have called it overpowered at some point in this video or the previous one, and it is relatively overpowered. If you think about what tanks at tier 6 have just such reliable, strong armor that they can even bounce tier 7s a lot of the time, there aren't that many. The Churchill VI does trade off that armor by having low top speed, but think about it, other tanks also have low top speed and their armor isn't as good as this. Their guns aren't as accurate as this. Look at the Churchill VII, look at the Churchill W. So the Churchill VI, it is a very reliable vehicle. It's got strong armor, it's got a great gun, it's got great DPM. The only downsides, lower alpha and low top speed. But overall, it is still a very nice tank. It is still very fun to play when you do get those games where you just bounce tons of damage and your DPM is just working very well. It is a nice tank to have. But yeah, that is it for the Churchill Mk.VI. Thanks for watching.